You are definitely in the right place in all of New York today. This is the only place to be, so thank you for coming. My name is Thomas Lafley. I'm the chief film critic of The Wrap, and I'm so beyond honored to be joined by a very special guest on the stage tonight. He is, a brilliant filmmaker, brilliant storyteller, a technical genius. He's shot some of my favorite films ever, and I'm sure he's done the same for you. I don't even know where to begin. I can probably use the entire time allotted for this Q&A to introduce him. Far From Heaven, Carol, Desperately Seeking Susan, Erin Brockovich, Mississippi Masala, and the list goes on. He has collaborated with everyone from Madonna to Mother Teresa. He has won countless awards, and he's nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Carol and Far From Heaven. Please put your hands together for the one and only Ed Lachman.
Well, thank you, but Pablo Lorraine had a lot to do with it.
It's an amazing movie, and your collaboration just gave us, I think, a timeless classic. We will learn this in time. But I'm wondering how the collaboration started on this movie. I know you've been friends, but you haven't collaborated on something before, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I like looking at films as much as working on it, maybe more. And I first saw Pablo's work at the New York Film Festival and with Tony Manero.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we just kind of developed a friendship. And he said, one day I'll bring you to Chile. But I never thought that was going to actually happen. We were always friendly. He actually came to New York and worked with Darius Conde, who's a friend. So I thought, wow, if he comes all the way to New York and works with a French cameraman, why is he going to bring me to Chile? But we did a commercial in Los Angeles, and he called me about a month later and said, would you come to Chile? And I said, sure. But obviously, I don't speak much Spanish, and I worked with his whole crew. And right from the beginning, he said he wanted to work in black and white. And usually, today you have to shoot in color, either in film or you shoot digitally in color, and then they transfer it into a monochromatic image. But he convinced Netflix, it was produced out of Mexico, that he was going to really shoot in black and white. And so that opened up a whole door for me, and I reached out to Aeroflex, the camera manufacturer in Germany, and I knew they had produced a large format camera for monochromatic, but now the lighter weight camera, because another conceit that he wanted to do was be on a crane for the whole time, a short, a 15-foot telescoping crane. And his idea was that we could move quicker and find angles. And actually that set was built for the size of the crane, that we could move in that and not have to take out walls. We did once or twice. So there were all those factors that kind of came into it. So Ari was just coming out with her own camera, and I thought they'll never get there, even if they were interested. But lo and behold, 10 days before we were to shoot, they said, we have a camera for you. So then I had to go back to Pablo and say, we have a camera, can the production afford it? Well, he's the production company, so he said yes. And so that was one aspect of it. Another aspect of it was that I worked with lenses that were actually made in the 30s for black. They were actually the primary lenses that shot black and white film. So now I just happened to remount those lenses for somebody had told me that in LA about this glass that was available. And so now I had the black and white lenses, the black and white sensor, so all these things contributed, and then there's an exposure system that I used for the first time.
And that's a system that you invented. I was reading about this
called
whole
EL Zone, and basically so I don't make it complicated. If you knew Ansel Adams, he developed a way of evaluating exposure so you could read shadow detail and highlights and place your negative where you would get the most detail. And it was a way of analyzing where your exposure was. And I worked on an idea about doing that for digital technology. And so I was just, again, very lucky. All the forces came together that a monitor company, Small HD, came out with this in their monitor. They licensed it from me, so I was able to use it for the first time for this film. And that's why you have this incredible shadow detail that sometimes you would lose if you didn't know where you were placing your highlights. Because sometimes if you overexpose something, you have to print it down and then you don't get the shadow detail. So what I was thinking about looking at today, what is the difference? Because the film before, not to say anything, he's a dear friend of mine, Matty Labatique, but that Maestro is color that they went black and white, and you don't get the mid-range, the subtlety of mid-range that you can get when you shoot monochromatic. The other thing is you can use filters that they used 50 years ago, black and white filters that you can't use on color film. You can try to do it in post, but it's not the same thing. So that's all the technical end.
Well, it really does sound like a perfect marriage of technique and intention to give us this look that's both timeless and also there's a purposeful artificiality to it. And you have worked in black and white before, some of the Todd Haynes films like Wonderstruck and other things. Maybe give us a little bit of a taste of what's more appealing to you, or what is appealing to you about shooting in black and white, something maybe you get when you're not working in color.
When you shoot in color, you have a problem of the color temperature, the day changes. And the amazing thing I realized again with black and white, because I hadn't shot black and white since Wonderstruck, I shot some black and white. But that was with film, and this was digital. But the amazing thing is, that's wonderful about black and white, is you can shoot from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, and it's just contrast. It's light and dark. In color, it changed the color temperature from cool to warm to cool to warm. It changes, and you have to modify what you're doing when you work with color. And colors, they always say black and white is harder because you don't see black and white, so you have to imagine how it's going to look in black and white. But once your eye gets more trained to that, and especially when you're looking at it on a monitor, you can affect how the black and white, like one thing that was interesting, we tested different colors for blood, and we ended up with blue. All the blood is blue because we found it had more luminosity. And then when I was in the hospital with my broken hip, when I broke a hip at the end of the show, I found out that in our body, that's why our veins look blue, our blood is blue. And it's only red when it hits the air.
And I want to kind of go to the beginning, when you first were presented with the concept, or you read the script, Pinochet as a 250-year-old raving vampire. I'm wondering what your reaction was, and what was the pull for you to the story?
Look, Pablo was my education, and the way he expressed it was that the Chileans have never been able to heal because they never had the justice to heal, and that their families and the individuals that paid the price, and even the church, there was a part of the church that did fight what Pinochet was doing to the people, but there was another part of the church that went along with him. And so when he explained it that way, I understood why he is forever. He died a multimillionaire, and he died free. And so the Chilean people will never be able to have any resolution to the crimes that were committed.
It's so interesting in the
Not
movie
like
that
Argentina, where he goes to jail.
it's so interesting that he is embarrassed about being called a thief, but he's not embarrassed about the murders.
Right.
He thinks of it as a necessity. So I'm also wondering what kind of perhaps cinephiliac conversations you and Pablo Larraín had watching this movie. Obviously, I'm thinking of Nosferatu, Vampire, some of those
I
canons, but other movies that you revisited.
I looked at those films, Vampire and Nosferatu by Murnau, and I did like Joseph von Sternberg, but it's so, you're just trying to make your day, and everything was in Spanish, and in some ways I like working on films where I don't speak the language, because then I can just look at it and see my own world. So, I don't know, it was just kind of things came together in abstract ways, and there wasn't an intellectualization about it.
And what can you tell us about those amazing flight sequences? Obviously there's some technique and post involved in it, but what did you bring to the table to also make them plausible when, Pinochet is flying over Santiago and so on and so forth?
This is interesting. All the night footage is against blue screen or green screen, so you can pull it out. But all the day scenes, they brought in, and I didn't even know about this, a acrobatic group from Colombia that worked on wires. And Paula, who was our actress, studied dance. So they put her on wires, and we did have a stunt double. And it was a 160-foot crane, and in the middle of the crane was a seat on cable, and the operator was you're actually seeing that double or Paula flying or moving around that landscape, and that it was a sheep farm in Patagonia. So that's real air-to-air photography, not with a drone. I mean, we did use the drone for the point of view of when they're flying. That was a drone. That was like the second unit that went out and filmed in areas. But I was just kind of like there on a vacation watching what was happening.
And I'm wondering for, all the films, but especially for a film so stylized like this, when everything is kind of in conversation with each other, what is your process with other departments like production design and costume design, especially you're shooting black and white? What is the harmony like amongst, other technical departments?
Well, the production didn't speak any English, and they worked a little differently. Generally here, I have an on-set prop person moving things around for the frame. But there, he came out of theater. He had no compulsion to be on the set all the time and move things around. I go, wait a minute, that's my set now, Well, we got along, but sometimes we had discussions through Pablo, like, don't move that or move that, So, for me, when I'm working on a set, it's what's in the frame that's important to me. How you compose the frame, how you move the image in the set. And great production designers actually think about the frame when they design the set. He had a little different approach to it, more like theater, like there's the stage and the set, and you just work with it. But like the testing we did, like the backgrounds were always dark. We did that, with tests that I wanted that separation between the characters and the background, so that there was a starkness to it, and I felt it would, represent. Also, I did something different that don't normally do. They always say the eyes are the soul of the character. And I had to light this mostly from, there was an overhead grid system, but I mostly lit it from the window. And because we moved the camera around a lot, I couldn't have lights on in the set to help their eyes out. You know, because generally you always want to help the eyes out. But I realized something, that these people are hiding from themselves and they're hiding from each other. So I let the eyes go darker than I ever normally would, and it kind of worked. First it was a mistake, and then I said, oh, that's kind of all right, that's interesting, you know. They always say Gordon Willis does top light and let the eyes go in the shadow. But here the eyes go in the shadow from cross light, and I thought it worked psychologically for the characters.
And on the opposite spectrum of that, the actress, you know, who plays Paola, her eyes are so fascinating. She kind of reminded me of Falconetti in some senses in the certain show. I'm wondering if you were thinking about that when you were filming her.
She had the most unusual face. Her eyes were very sunken, you know, so that was actually the first scene that I shot with her is when she's interviewing Pinochet, Jaime Valdez. And that's when I realized I have to help her eyes out, you know, because and her nose, she just had the most incredible skin and face,
and I love the way you shot those interview scenes. The way that she was portrayed, it was almost like they were looking down on her and she was looking up on them. And so what was the intention behind some of those framing choices?
That was something else that Pablo thrust upon me. Mm-hmm. He actually put two cameras, one against the other, right next to each other. I've never done that. And I could only have one light source. I used they call it a China ball, like a paper balloon, you know, that use in, you know, kitchens or whatever. And I had one bulb, and I just put it as close to the lens as possible. And I think he did it for time, but also he did it for matching cuts. Mm-hmm. But I've never done that, where you put a camera right next to each other looking in opposite directions. And that's why we did all, there's a consistency in the interviews, the way he cuts. And he did something else that I don't normally do. He loves center framing. Like most of the film is center framed. I like to frame more to the, you know, the architecture of the image, and so maybe it's off to the right or left, or they're looking left or right, you know, so you see more space between them. But he likes center framing, so.
That had a confrontational quality, to see someone in that center. I just really love that choice. Mm-hmm. What was something specifically difficult, a sequence that was most challenging to get right in El Conde? If there was one.
Well, those were big night scenes, and nobody wanted to say no to me, so, you know, I would say, oh, well, we'll have, you know, 8, 10 Ks around the set, and then I'd get the day of the pre-light, and they didn't have them. So I think, well, tomorrow, mañana sí, I didn't have. So I finally had to adapt to like what I had, and probably that was an improvement, that if I had everything I wanted, I wouldn't have done it.
I want to just talk a little bit about your career in general. I mean, over a brilliant and, you know, in progress ongoing career, you have collaborated with everyone, you know, shot across genres, but do you have a filmmaker that you would still love to work with, and who would that be? We won't let the secret out.
No, I always thought, you know, I went to art school, and then I ended up, you know, being cinematographer, cameraman for other people's films, and I've always made some of my own films. So there's always new people, you know. So it's just, I'm inspired by when I see other people's work, even other cinematographers, you know. And so somebody that I don't know, you know, there was this wonderful Mexican film, Totem. You know?
Oh, right, yes, Lida Aviles, the filmmaker.
Really talented, you know, she's done 2 films.
Yes, she's incredible. And I was listening to one of your old interviews. I think you gave it during the time of Far From Heaven, this beautiful Serbian melodrama with Todd Haynes. And you mentioned that you think about your work in a painterly fashion. You think of yourself as a painter sometimes. I'm wondering if you still feel that way, or if you do, if you could open that up for us.
Well, you know, I studied painting, studio art, and but I didn't like the idea that I'd be alone in a room all the time. And it's easier that someone brings a story to you, and then you find the visual language to tell the story. But yeah, I always think of other imagery, and, you know, I for inspiration. You know, it could be painting, it could be a photographer, it could be. So yeah, it's the thing that people have to understand. You know, like it isn't about imitating something. There's a reason why people create images the way they do, because of the time period. That's something that Todd Haynes is very much into, about the tools that you use affect what the image is. Like when you look at even Wonderstruck per se, and there's 70s and the 20s in that film. Well, he wanted to use the same apparatus that, like the dollies in the street. I call it Owen Rosman, the cinematographer. How do you do those long tracking shots in the street and not see track? Well, they did it on something called the Western Dolly. It has rubber wheels. Today we use those just to put equipment on. But it gave it a feeling that you wouldn't get. It was actually not the best way to do it, but that's the way they did it in the 70s in the streets in New York. And so that's the way Todd wanted to do it. So I always find it interesting to go deeper into how it's done, why it's done that way.
And you know, speaking of those different techniques and tools that are available, there are obviously so many changes in the way films are shot. Some people still swear by film, and others love the flexibility and freedom the digital brings on the table. I'm wondering where you stand, or which one do you feel closer to?
Well, I used to always be that it had to be film, but the way I feel about it now is certain stories can be told in film and certain can be told digitally. The problem is it's becoming more and more difficult to shoot in film. You don't have the labs don't have equipment in the lab to evaluate. It's called a printer light system, Hazeltine. They expect you just to expose the negative and it goes to a digital transfer. And the most important thing is to know where your exposure is. It isn't just your light meter, but the film tells you where your exposure is through a machine. And now a lot of these, New York, the Kodak in New York doesn't have that machine. So if I shoot a film in New York, I'm going to send it to LA. There's one lab in LA, Photochem, that still has the old equipment. I'm shooting a new film now with Pablo in Budapest, and it's an old lab that I just found out, oh yes, we can do it, but you know, they have to put somebody on. Also, the infrastructure for film is being lost, because you know, you need a film loader, someone that loads the film in the magazine. Well, younger and younger people aren't coming up in the industry to learn how to load film. On Wonderstruck, they were sending film to California, never with no camera report. You know, so it's just a slow. Or the equipment is, there aren't people to repair the cameras the way they used to be, or they don't have the parts. So it's like the death knell. You know, as much as certain films should be shot on film, actors like the way they look on film better than a lot of digital look. And you know, part of the look, there's no diffusion in this film. It was using lenses from 75 years ago. You know, that's
what we're doing. We're going against what the industry is pushing because that's the way they're gonna make more money. You know, they come out with lenses, they come out with higher resolution cameras, but actually, image makers don't necessarily want that. Everything shouldn't look like a photorealistic painting.
Right. Absolutely, yes. I often feel that when I'm watching a film at home. I don't want to feel like I am sitting in the same room with these people. I want to feel like I'm watching a movie. So I think that goes with what you're saying. I am getting a signal to wrap up, but before we go, what can you tell us about the film that you said you're shooting with Pablo in Budapest right now? Can you give us a little hint? If you can't, I understand.
He never likes to talk about it.
Okay.
I'll just say that this is publicized. It's partly a story about Maria Callas.
Amazing. Can't wait for it. Looking forward. Thank you so much for this lovely conversation. Take care.